Hi folks, Kevin Inkster here. In this video I want to show you how to make this beautiful little coffee table. It looks like a solid block of rounds of wood all stuck together, but in actual fact it's quite hollow, and it's a wonderful project for using the turbo plane. So here we have a bunch of branches that I've collected some time ago and left them to dry out, so they're thoroughly dried out. You can of course just cut down wood which is already dried out on the tree, but I collected these some time before. Now the idea is that you need to have enough to make up the perimeter of the table, and in my case that's about 1.5 meters side by side. I've selected wood from around about 30 mil up to about 50 mil. You can use almost any size timber really. I've now cut them to length. I used a radial arm saw. You can use any kind of a hand saw or a table saw. And when you cut them to length, cut them with about 20 mil excess so that you've got a bit of room to move when you're planing it at the end. So here I have two pieces of plywood, 300 millimeters by 300 millimeters. I'm going to cut the corners off them because I'm going to place the largest rounds in the corners, and then I'm going to fill the rest in with the other round pieces of wood. The bottom piece I'm going to cut a circular hole in the center so that I can get access to the underneath. Also it doesn't need to be solid. On the top it's solid because on there I'm going to stick the small thinner rounds of the same wood that'll make up the top surface. Now each piece of wood I've cut to length. I used a fence and I used my radial arm saw, but you can literally do it by hand just by marking it, or you can use a table saw such as this. To fit it onto the plywood, what I've done is I've made up this little jig here to hold the wood. Now the reason I've done that is that I want to put slots into the wood for it to grip onto the plywood. But round wood is quite dangerous. It can easily rotate and turn. So what I've done is I've just made up a couple of pieces of V plywood and nailed them or screwed them onto a block of wood, so that when I put them down like so, put it like so, now it sits very, very secure. I can set the depth that I want to cut into it with my table saw. You can do it with, again, with a radial arm saw or any other kind of saw. But this just keeps it nice and steady, so I can keep it against my fence. I can put it against there like so, and then I can cut the depth that I want for the slots. So you get your piece of wood, mark the top of the piece of the wood, which is opposite where you want to put the slot. So I want to put the slot here, and I set the depth of the slot just by running it against the blade like so. Now what I've done is I've cut a piece of wood, and I've cut it to the thickness of the plywood that I want, minus the thickness of the blade. So you may have to experiment a little bit just to get the exact right thickness. But now if I use this as a guide, I don't have to measure anything. I put the wood up against the fence, and then I always do the first cut by using this piece as a spacer. So I hold that apart, I do the first cut, and then the second cut I just push it against the fence, and it'll now cut the slot the width that I want. So just the first cut first. So there it is, that sets my position. Like so. Bring it back, now against the fence. There you have your slot, which should be the right thickness to fit your plywood straight into, like so. I've chosen the larger pieces to go on each of the corners. Now what I've done is I've cut off about 6 centimeters here off each of the corners, and you put the larger pieces onto those corners because they'll be machined in that plane and that plane, matching up with the other pieces. So the larger pieces in the corners, like so. So here we have the 4 corner posts glued into place. I just used clamps diagonally across the center to hold them in place. They've set now, and what I'll do now is I'll start fitting these pieces in between, and I'll shave bits off these just to make them fit nicely, and depending on how many I have to fit in there, I may have to shave one down to get a nice close fit. Now you'll appreciate that I'm learning as I go with this. I've never done a job like this before, and one of the things I've found is that because these pieces of wood are all bent in different shapes, etc., it's actually quite difficult to get the slots in the right position. So what I've found myself doing is the first slot I do on my jig, as you saw on the table saw, and then I place it onto the table like so that I line it up onto the plywood at the top, and then I simply just get a pencil and mark the bottom like so. And then I cut this slot to match so that it's now the right distance and it drops into place. Another thing that I discovered is that because all the pieces are different shapes, it's a simple matter of just rotating it to find the best match for the piece alongside it. And that way you find where you want to make the slot, and then you can mark where you want to do, at what angle you want to do your slot, and you get a nice, fairly close positioning of each of the pieces one to the other so that they nestle into each other nicely. So now I've nestled these pieces all into place, and you'll see that I've taken edges off various pieces to make them fit the shape. So I just got the turbo plane here, and I just ran that down along the inside there and just trimmed it off in places. And it's really quite a simple matter of putting them into place, rotating them to the right angle, and then just marking with a pencil where you want to take them off. I'd then take it off, put it into a vise over there, laying it flat. I would usually mark where the horizontal is, and then I'd just take the shape and then try it against it until I get it reasonably close. Remember, this doesn't have to be accurate, it's just to get it nicely nestling. Another thing that I've done just to save me from losing the pieces before I glue it is I've just numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., so that I keep them in order so that when I put it back together for gluing, everything goes into its right place. So what I'll do now is complete that around the edge, and then I'll cut rings to go in the center, and I'll place them in place, and then I'll glue the whole thing together. Then I'll start the sculpting. So here's a piece that I've cut, and you can see how I've marked here where I want to take a bit of material off here just to get it a bit closer at the top and the bottom here. So I'll just roughly mark that where I want to cut it, and the angle, and now I'll go and plane it with the turbo plane. So now all the side pieces are in place. They're not glued in yet, so I'll glue them in. And while that's setting, I'll cut a bunch of rounds to go in here. When that's all done, I'll be planing the sides, etc. And there's a fair bit of work in that, but I'll show you all of that in the next installment.